President Bush is to go to Los Angeles tomorrow, a day earlier than planned, so he can spend more time there discussing last week's riots. The extension of the trip is seen as an attempt to head off growing criticism of the way he's handled the issue. General Colin Powell, America's top military officer, is among those warning that failure to tackle the underlying causes of discontent could lead to worse problems.
Our hearts hurt because of that violence. And our hearts hurt because as we watched the tragic events in Los Angeles unfold, we were thinking, no, not again, we can't let this happen again. It shouldn't be, we've come too far for this. But it did happen. And we see once again what a long way we still have to go. Because the problem goes beyond Rodney King. The problem goes beyond Los Angeles. It goes beyond the trial of those 4 officers. The problem goes to the despair that still exists in the black community over the inability of black Americans to fully share in the American dream.
Los Angeles itself has resumed an air of normality, with the curfew lifted and people returning to work. As reconstruction of the devastated areas begins, local people are trying to work out who's to blame and how to prevent the violence happening again. This report from Tim Hewitt in Los Angeles.
It's just not about Rodney King. Rodney King lit the match. Yeah. Now we're burning.
I think all the hoodlums in the neighborhood took advantage of the chaos.
Terrible. And there's no police.
Seeing guys dragged out of their cars, that could have been me. I've driven through those neighborhoods. That could have been me.
I look at it as a big, gigantic wake-up call. We cannot just ignore the inner city.
The Hollywood Hills are a world apart from the ghetto.
Two, come on, help. Yes, sir.
But the young whites at play here have been given a violent reminder about the volatility of racial discontent in America.
Go. How could this ever happen? It couldn't reach the residence area. But when it hit downtown, where I go to the movies, where I shop, then I thought, yeah, there was a possibility.
When I was a little kid, there was gangs, but they were all, in little neighborhoods, and they wouldn't bug you unless you went into them.
And it was chains and brass knuckles.
Now, they're coming into our neighborhoods and bugging and messing with us.
The explosion in Los Angeles was detonated by 2 clips of video. A Korean shopkeeper who shot dead a black teenager was put on probation. 4 white policemen who beat black motorist Rodney King were found not guilty. But its roots reach far deeper, reflecting a hopelessness that in the inner cities was only a heartbeat away from rage.
When the police came...
Rage articulated by members of LA's street gangs.
This opportunity is to get at these police, you know what I'm saying? Because they've been killing us, stomping us, slapping us for years, but it never comes out. And everybody knows they've been doing it since the beginning of time.
And when we get them on tape, they get found not guilty in a system that doesn't count for us.
And hopelessness expressed by people like Lloyd Wells, invalided out of a construction job, now trying to eke out a living as a scrap merchant in a ghetto from which he sees no escape.
If you don't have anything, how you gonna get anything? If you come here with $4,000 or $5,000 to $10,000, maybe you can start you a small business and move up. But when you don't have anything, that's, if you never been there, you don't know.
Coming up for your water, your eggs and bananas.
But complaints that not enough has been done to help the black community since the last riots here in the 60s have met with an unsympathetic response in many quarters. Certainly in white middle-class Simi Valley, where the Rodney King case was tried, families like the Holts say blacks should do more for themselves.
You can pour all kinds of money in there, but it's not doing any good if there's not a way for them to, I guess, get motivated and get going to better their lives and stuff.
Bob Hopkins is a black who bettered his life from an upbringing in the ghetto to a real estate business and a $3 million home in the hills. He says blacks should be more motivated, but should also be given an even chance.
Being white in this country gives you a lot of tickets. In fact, I get nervous when I see white people that haven't achieved, because I figure if you're white and can't make it, there's something wrong with you, and I want to make sure I stay away from them because they've got some real problems.
The dark view of the riots is that they've brought into the open racial hostilities that will now run out of control. More optimistic is the belief that the bloodletting has sounded an alarm that will force the authorities to address the social issues that lay behind the violence. Tim Hewitt, News at 10, Los Angeles.
President Bush is in Los Angeles, seeing for himself the destruction caused by the riots. The president said he had been outraged by what he called the wanton lawlessness. He's also been meeting black community leaders in the city. He told them that justice would prevail in the Rodney King case. It was the acquittal of police officers filmed beating Mr. King that sparked the riots.
For President Bush, the Los Angeles riots are the domestic equivalent of Desert Storm, the most important crisis of his presidency and one which could lose him November's election. White House attempts to blame 1960s social policies for 1990s violence were met with derision. Mr. Bush changed tack and spoke of a government role against poverty.
There is no question the federal government has a terribly important, a fundamental role in ending poverty and despair in our cities, but the time really has come to try a new way. So we need to let poor families take back control of their lives by making our commitment to end poverty and despair greater than ever before.
Immediately there were anti-Bush demonstrations. Here, Korean Americans whose businesses suffered most in the rioting. But the president wanted to see it for himself, and on a walkabout through the worst-hit areas of South Central LA, he made it clear he had come to listen and learn.
I'm here to look this over. I'm sorry.
The Bush aid plan involves emergency relief, tax incentives for businesses in poor areas, and encouraging home ownership on the principle you don't burn what you own. Housing Secretary Jack Kemp had a long discussion with South Central residents on the new buzzword, empowering people to help themselves.
Nobody's thought about us before. You understand? Nobody has taken into consideration that we have to do something for ourselves here at home.
Kemp was sympathetic too on the Rodney King verdict.
From what I saw on television, it was a travesty.
And the president's own verdict on the destruction, dismay and outrage.
Then you recognize you got to try to do everything you can to guard against it. You got to enforce the law, and then you have to try to get to the cause of the unrest, and we're trying to do that.
Law and order has been vital in securing the election of Republican presidents Nixon, Reagan and Bush. But if the Democrats can turn the riot issue to a question of poverty and civil rights, they, not the president, may yet reap the electoral benefits. Gavin Esler, BBC News, Los Angeles.
President Bush has paid his first visit to the scenes of last week's Los Angeles riots, which left 58 people dead. He repeated his outrage at what he called wanton lawlessness, but he also promised the government would tackle the underlying causes of the trouble. The 48 hours of looting and destruction has left a bill for damage of close to $3 billion.
President Bush arrived in Los Angeles asking for the healing to begin. All around him were the scars. The president was in somber mood. The only pose he wanted to make was a serious one.
Sir, could you stop and turn around so we can see you? No, I'm here to look this over. I'm sorry.
The manager of a supermarket, which was looted and burned, had this message for the president.
We need you back here again, not just here to make a visit because there's media. Everyone's here right now with the media. He needs to come through Los Angeles and these urban areas more often so he can get a feel and see if his programs are working.
But there is another issue raised by the riots, law and order, which is why the president balanced concern with condemnation.
This is just wanton lawlessness as he described it to me. And so there is that aspect that then you recognize you got to try to do everything you can to guard against it. You got to enforce the law, and then you have to try to get to the cause of the unrest, and we're trying to do that.
But the president is making no promises of government giveaways. Indeed, his aides have blamed the riots on the so-called soft social programs of Democratic administrations in the 60s. Though his likely Democratic opponent, here before him, preferred to blame the last 12 years of the Reagan-Bush era.
They're looking around for somebody to blame. 12 years of denial and neglect, and now they're looking for somebody to blame that happened in the 60s.
But the president must also pay heed, especially in election year, to the Republican right.
There's one way to stop this riot. It wasn't with a new model cities program announced from Washington. It was with superior force dealing with hooligans, criminals, and thugs.
Today, however, President Bush was preaching racial harmony, looking not to blame, but to build. And the way to do it, he said, was through prayer, faith, and the family. Though others in the community wanted something more substantial.
I think that it was beautiful that he came out here and stood here, but I want to see something else. I want to see him hand over that cash to these businesses.
All these years, and it hasn't shown anything yet. You know, why? Why now? 15 minutes is going to make a difference? None.
President Bush is then treading a tightrope. He wants to be seen to be offering help to the underprivileged without promising handouts. But his eye is also on the richer communities where he needs to win votes, and where the fear of this happening to them may be the overriding concern in the presidential campaign. Kevin Dunn, News at 10, Los Angeles.
President Bush has outlined a 6-point plan to restore hope to the poor of America's big cities after the Los Angeles riots. The city's police have arrested 3 black men for dragging a white lorry driver out of his cab and severely beating him at the beginning of the riots.
Tell them to stand by to receive an arrestee.
The riots are over and the reckoning is beginning. Los Angeles police this morning arrested Damian Football Williams and other black gang members alleged to have taken part in violent beatings. Leading the raid was the controversial LA police chief Daryl Gates, widely criticized for his failure to contain the riots.
I personally arrested Football. He is the one that took the brick when Mr. Denny was on the ground on his knees and raising his hand for help. Football is the one that came over and hit him side of the face with the brick.
It was videotape of the brutal attack on lorry driver Reginald Denny, which allowed the FBI to identify 3 of the men arrested today. The slow police response to the incident, which left Denny badly injured, led to calls for Daryl Gates's immediate resignation.
The Los Angeles Police Department very, very concerned at our inability to reach Mr. Denny at that time he was being assaulted and after, and to assist him, and so we're hopeful that at least this will atone for some of that.
With 6 months to go to a presidential election, George Bush has been shaken by the riots, and he today announced a series of urban assistance measures hastily concocted in response to criticism that his policies were the root cause of the inner city problems.
All of these are designed to restore hope and to bring some cohesion to these communities and offer these young people some opportunities.
George Bush says the arrests will continue, but with today's announcement, he's acknowledged that he also needs new policies to tackle the underlying causes of the urban discontent. Martin Sixsmith, BBC News, Washington.
The chief of the Los Angeles police personally led a raid today to arrest 3 men wanted since the riots a fortnight ago. The 3, filmed attacking and beating a truck driver, Reginald Denny, were charged with attempted murder, robbery and torture.
Tell them to stand by to receive an arrestee.
Under cover of darkness, 200 police officers moved into the ghetto they abandoned in the riots to make the arrests. Controversial and much criticized police chief Daryl Gates personally arresting the main suspect. Gates later said the police wanted to make up for their failure to help Reginald Denny.
The Los Angeles Police Department very, very concerned at our inability to reach Mr. Denny at that time he was being assaulted and after, and to assist him, and so we're hopeful that at least this will atone for some of that.
The brutal attack on Denny has come to epitomize the senseless violence of the Los Angeles riots. The 3 suspects are all street gang members, the one nicknamed Football, accused of the most sickening single blow of a sickening sequence. Another is accused of dragging Denny from his cab. The 3rd of standing on him while the attack continued. 6 more individuals have been identified by police, but not yet caught. Denny, shown here in a home video, was rescued by other blacks and is recovering in hospital. The police, meanwhile, are trying to restore their tarnished reputation. Kevin Dunn, News at 10 in the United States.